Hello and welcome to this AP World Cram with Fiveable. Tonight we'll be talking about globalization. How are we doing tonight? Got the team out there. I'm going to pop a poll up to get us started and kind of see. This is Unit 9, and it's also most of the topics are post-World War II. And so for most students, this is a topic they may not have studied as much as others. So I'm just going to put a simple poll up here to start. Let me see, go ahead and show. So let me know how much you have studied this. So I'm Eric Beckman, and I am here for this CRAM session. I will share my screen in a moment because that's where the action is, but I thought I would say hello. And before we get started, let me just say welcome, everyone. A good-looking group here. Okay. So go ahead and vote, please, and see. I'm going to share my screen now. Requires concentration. I have the captions going tonight, so I don't think globalization so 20th century. There's not quite as many words that could really trip up our deal. Maybe like Deng Xiaoping. We'll say his name. Oh, not bad. It comes through. I always like playing with the captions as a world history teacher. So the if you haven't been here before, even if you have, the poll is down at the bottom of the chat. Just a reminder, this is being recorded, and some people might be hearing this later. If you have a question, your name will appear on the screen. Please change your name if you want to avoid this as you come in. See, a lot of people are rolling. And are already down with that. Okay. Oh, thank you. We got some votes coming in. Let's go ahead and keep that going. See how many people are here. As always, you are encouraged to follow the Fiveable on the socials. This is our last back here. This is our last unit FRQ, or our last unit content cram before we get to the FRQ tips streams. So we will have those coming up. The next two Melissa will be doing, and then I'll be doing the one on the first. So I have a poll question at the end, and if you have anything that you're especially interested in doing, you can let us know in the chat here, and you can also keep everything rolling on the Discord, and you can ask there. Natalie does a good job of communicating back to Melissa and me about what kinds of things people are interested in. Okay. We have trivia tomorrow, and then of course the after party in the Discord where you can keep all your questions, bring all your questions up. Okay. So here's the link to the trivia tomorrow in the evening. I know Melissa will be doing some of it, and I'm not sure exactly what my involvement will be at this point. Oh, you mean amongst the students? The 5-hour cram will be epic. That is super fun. Melissa and I split that last year and had a. I mean, it's a lot, but it's good. Good stuff. And kids who did that did well. All right, I'm going to go ahead and publish our results to the poll so you can kind of see where people are at. And it looks like a lot of people have been exposed to the idea, but very few people feel like they've spent a lot of time on it. Okay, so we have trivia. We have trivia tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern, so good for the West Coast people, and also for East Coast teenagers who are definitely probably up at 9 p.m. I'm actually working on the questions for that tonight as things turned out. So if you tune into this, you will do well tomorrow with the. You'll do well tomorrow with the trivia. All right, so here's our opening image, which many of you have probably seen because it was kind of viral, as the kids say. You can go ahead and take a peek here at this. So always, whenever we have an image like this, the question is always what can we learn from it? How many people saw this when it happened a few weeks ago? I remember thinking, I remarked to a colleague, I could probably teach a whole course, or it was our whole world history course, because the school where I teach, the second part of the world history course for on level students starts with imperialism, which includes the making of the Suez Canal. So if you just go ahead and drop into the chat there. Yeah, what does this tell us, or what can we learn from this image? So I know I'm glad I'm not the person who was taking suggestions from a lot of randos on social media about what they should be doing to get that thing unstuck, because I assume it was quite a bit more complicated than we might know. Yeah, what do you notice? Yeah, and what does it tell us? Meaning, as a historical object, if this is on the 2040 DBQ for AP World History class, how will students use it as evidence? Okay. What is on there? What is so the ship is in the Suez Canal, and why did this ship getting stuck here tell us so many kinds of things? Right? Yeah, it literally blocked trade, like this thing being stuck. Did that. Yeah, are affected by each other, Anu says. Yeah, so that's like the interdependency of our modern world. Yeah, if we think technology is one of the key concepts here, so what does it tell us about that? Yeah. The ships are really large. Well, they can fit through there. It's just like this thing got blown into the side. Yeah, right. There we are. Maybe. Yeah. Okay. So these different things. All right. A lot of good answers coming through in the chat about how technology is good, but it's not like doesn't end everything. Mhm. Okay. Very good. All right. So that is an image that brings a lot of things together, and the shipping container is one of the key items. The container there. I'll have a slide with some containers there. Okay. So with this with this particular topic, there is a lot of vocabulary that I think, especially for students who either went through this quickly or who haven't gotten to this yet, so you're going to go through it quickly when your class gets there. So it might be worth writing a few terms down. It's always worth thinking about what the key concepts here. And so there's three, but there's really a couple. So these are the key concepts, these are the big ideas, and we'll see all three of them here, but especially numbers 1 and 3. That's where most of the action is for this particular unit. Now, number 2 is going to function as context, because a lot of the content here is post World War II. And it's not just that it's after World War II, like that's when it was in the order of things that happened. It's that World War II was really very important context for the development of a lot of the things that we talk about as globalization. Now, of course, globalization is in some ways 500 years old, going back to Manila galleons and Vasco da Gama and global commerce like that. But there's been a real uptick in the intensity, like the volume of world trade, really exemplified by that scene from the Suez Canal since World War II. Okay, so here are our sort of key. Sure. Here are our key power vocabulary terms. I'm going to give you a moment to take a look at those and then let me know, like I do, which one you would like to spend a little more time on. There's simple definitions underneath each one. And by power vocabulary, I mean things that could be in the questions, or that like in the prompts or in the questions. So these are all terms that are taken um, from the course and exam description, and you can really map those straight onto test questions. So problems of distance are things that people address with, I'm going to put a poll up too, but you should feel free just to put in the chat. If you look at this, you're like, I can tell you immediately which one it is that I need more of. Some of them, the definitions just maybe not right on the tip of your tongue, but then the examples will be, and then of course the opposite can happen. So you should go ahead and okay, why don't you go ahead and vote? I appreciate the comments in the chat too. So I'm going to show this. Okay. So free market, and this is down at the bottom. You can go ahead and vote down at the bottom. Even if you've already commented in the chat, go ahead and do that because I see the metrics here. What does that mean? I know at the end of the stream for Unit 8, Melissa reported, I saw the poll where a lot of people were talking about economics. So I already have that kind of baked into what I put together here. Like I said, it'll be a little bit heavier on some of the vocab to help you out with that. Okay. So free market policies is a term that is somewhat synonymous with another term, economic liberalism. So we'll talk about those two things together. The most important thing to know about economic liberalism is it doesn't map straight onto like what we think of in our political debates today, like liberal versus conservative. It's there would be a lot of people who we would think of as conservatives politically who would think of themselves as economic liberals. So that can be a little confusing. So you have to just take liberalism like literally here, like freer, like more freedom. Okay. Consumer culture has to do with people buying things. So the culture around shopping, if you will. Now, purchasing things as part of culture. And then rights-based discourse, probably, rights is a familiar concept of human rights. So the word that's in there, discourse, which again could come up in questions or multiple choice answers. Discourse just means the rhetoric, discussion, communication, things like that. All right, we're getting a pretty clear preference here. When you have 4 choices and we have more than half for one, that's really pretty clearly showing me that. So I'm going to put this out there. If you want to vote, it's down at the bottom. What do you need more on? And I'll take an extra moment here, and then I'll also linger more when we get to those slides. Okay. Okay, you can see here how the people voted, and so we'll take a look at that. All right. So free market policies are things that are related to capitalism. But it's not going to be exactly the same as capitalism because a free market can happen without a lot of investment. And it's a term that is very relative, meaning in communist China, there is, in communist China, starting in the 1980s, the country liberalized, producing the market socialism or the mix of communism and capitalism that China is today. So there, free market policies did liberalize the economy, but there was still a lot more government control of the economy in China than in, than in most countries in the world. So it's the most important thing I would say here is it's a relative term, and that the free market means the freedom for people to produce, to buy, and to sell things as they wish. Okay. So that's the idea of free market. So the marketplace there is, who decides what is produced, who decides what's available, who decides what prices are. And if that's decided by the market, like a free exchange based on supply and demand, then that's a freer market. That's the main idea, but I will definitely tell you more as we go through. Okay. So the first key concept related to this was technology. And it's important to keep this in mind, even though in some ways this is the easiest part, I think, of the 20th century to grasp. Like we all know that technology is advancing rapidly and that there's lots of changes, like even within your lifetimes. How many of you were born in 2005? some of you were probably born. I should have made that a poll. Some of you were probably born in 2005. 2005 was the year that the genome for the 1918 influenza was sequenced. So, like, there's knowledge since you were born that changes how we study some of these parts of the 20th century. Yeah, I was thinking some of you 10th graders might have been born in that year. Yeah. And so that's just in your lifetime that this whole new world of knowledge is out there. So here are some images showing things that solved problems of distance. Now, all that problems of distance means is that um, kinds of communication and travel that were difficult because of how far apart things were. So why don't you take a look at this and see if you can recognize what some of these, just go ahead and put in the chat. So which technologies do you see here? Because you could probably come up with an even bigger list yourselves than the ones I found pictures for. So which technologies are these? And how did they solve problems of distance? You might see the one that's in the here. It's the thing that's in the background. This is a German picture from the 1920s. This is from the 1950s. Oh, people are getting all kinds of things. Markella for the win. I think you got 4 out of the 5 right there. That is awesome. Yep, this is from the 50s. And then these are all from now. The others. Right? Right. Good. Yep, this is a cell phone tower. Thank you. We have that there, and someone sees the radio in the background. The shipping container is such an important development, and it really shows how it's often the intersection of technologies that's important, because the container itself is just a box that's the same size. But the combination of that with barcoding technology and information management technology that allows computer systems to track where these things are. I think one of the issues with that ship stuck in the Suez Canal is that the containers themselves were already scheduled to be filled with other things when they got places. So we have that. And this is a map of underwater fiber optic technologies, like underwater wires that make the internet possible. This is related to the internet. So a lot of the things that you might just think of right off kind of the top of your head with problems of distance, how do people communicate across distance? You might add, telephones onto this, although that's kind of starting in the 19th century, but, widespread telephones. And then transportation. So here we have airplanes. But there's lots of, you might also everything, trucks, cars, railroads, things that are better, faster in the 20th century. Okay. And then secondly, energy, do I think, is the screen smaller for some people? Like if I make my screen wider, does that make a difference? I can do that. Oh, I bet that does. Does that make a difference if you're noticing? So I can definitely do that. Sorry. Okay, so here we have energy technologies. And so these are ways that are going to affect the economy because there's a lot more energy that's available to people. Do not know why that would be with the screen being smaller. I'm seeing that in the chat. So let me take a look on the other thing here. Yep. Sharing. I've got the captions are coming in underneath the picture now, so we will keep rolling. I think the slides are linked here too, so if you wanted to look at them yourself, you can. So here we have nuclear energy, and then petroleum. The lower right there is Kuwait, showing petroleum production. The top right is from Brazil, and all those numbers on there are the different blends. And it's in Brazil they use a lot of biofuels. Oh, yeah. In Brazil they use a lot of biofuels. Um, and so those are the different ones and blends that you can get there. So these are things you want to think again, what's the effect with these kinds of things? It's like, well, technology expands. Okay. And then it's always with any kind of evidence that you might use, then it's like, what's the effect of that? You have to use it to boost an argument. So the thing with problems of distance is that's part of globalization because they reduce the problem that distance has. Like, for example, what we're doing right now reduces the problem of distance. You all are all over the world, and I'm talking to you. And so the problem of distance has been reduced or eliminated. And the same thing here, energy, how does that affect things? Well, it leads to more, leads to economic growth because there's more energy to power different kinds of production. So with nuclear energy, it's producing electricity, and then electricity is used to run all kinds of things. The third thing with technology relates to demographics. So if you are, yeah, got some good comments in the chat. Demographics. So if you're writing terms on this and you don't know what this is, this might be one to write down. Demographics is information about human populations, like demos is people and graphic for data, information about human population. So the most basic human population statistic is population, like how many humans are there. And so in the 20th century, there's a paradox because in many industrializing societies, fertility, the number of births per woman goes down. And there's a few reasons for that. Now, not everywhere, but in many places that happens. And one is because there's increased access and technology for birth control. So, oral contraceptives, what we call the birth control pill. And also because families are more interested in limiting family size. This has the additional effect of giving women more control over their bodies, which is part of women being able to control reproduction, is one of the factors in another topic here, which is the participation of women as equal members of society in things like, the economy and politics and education. Right? And then urban societies, now there's, of course, every family is different. So these are generalizations, but urban families tend to limit their size more than rural families. And typically that's explained as economic. For farming families, the addition of children is additional laborers. But for, in an urban setting, children are not necessarily going to labor, especially after we get past child labor laws and societies become wealthier. And so more children increase household expenses. And so families are more likely to limit. Of course, every family is going to make their own decisions, but these are generalizations across time and space. But population goes way up in the course of the 20th century. And part of that is because not all societies are in the same place. So if you take AP Human Geography, you'll learn about, or regular geography, human geography, you'll learn about the demographic transition model. And so that means societies that are in one stage in that, there's still going to be high births. But for all groups across the 20th century, in general, mortality or deaths went down. And that decreasing mortality is the main reason for the greatly increasing population in the 20th century. So what are the key factors there? So this is one of the really important things, that in the 20th century, in general, of course, different areas are going to have different conditions. And of course, there's big exceptions like World War II. But in general, mortality rates, that's how many people are dying, that's generally speaking going to go down. So the first factor in that's medicine. And you should know that the most important factors in medicine are vaccines and antibiotics. So obviously there's a lot of miracles of modern medicine, and we can treat a lot of diseases that we hadn't before. But in terms of lives per innovation, vaccines, like the flu shot, like the COVID vaccine that people are getting, like the vaccines that many of you got as children, those things really save lives. There's very few people die from things like measles. And 100 years ago, a lot of children would have died of measles. Not most, but but enough to make a big difference. And then antibiotics. When I talked about the 1918 influenza pandemic, today a lot fewer people would die from that pandemic because most people who died, or one of the bigger causes of death at least, was from pneumonia. People got pneumonia as a secondary infection. And if that happened today, we would be able to treat that with antibiotics. And then the second piece is increased agricultural production. So if this sounds familiar, in each era, we're looking at agriculture and seeing why is there more production and why is there more population and more economic activity, and there's some sort of um, usually innovation in agriculture. So this would be another one that I think is worth writing down if you haven't come across it, because the Green Revolution itself is, the phrase is not intuitive. And the reason it's not intuitive is because green sometimes means something different. I wrote chemicals there twice. There's like chemical fertilizers, chemical pesticides. Chemicals are a big part of this green revolution. So the word green might not suggest that to us today, but this is a phrase that really literally just means plants. So hybrid seeds and then later genetically modified organisms and chemical agriculture all greatly boosted food production. Now, there are a lot of other effects to that. There's a negative effect. Smaller farmers had trouble purchasing these things, like less wealthy farmers in places like India, and were pushed off the land and wound up migrating to cities and before they or when they didn't want to. And then some of these pesticides and herbicides, of course, have a lot of negative effects on the environment. So it's a debatable topic, but it definitely boosted food production during that time. All right. I have up here another batch of things that are related to this in the course and exam description that include some phrases that I think are pretty accessible for students. So why don't you go ahead and take a look at that? And maybe we can start with the first one. What would make those diseases associated with poverty? What would that mean? Right? And this means as a society, not particular individuals. Yeah. So why would some, you can answer in the chat here. If you look at those things, let me tell you just a little bit about them real quick. Malaria is a parasite that is transmitted by mosquitoes. So it's and tuberculosis is a bacteria that's airborne, and cholera is a bacteria that um comes through the water that you can get in bad water. It actually grows in human feces. So untreated sewage can cause this, but it's a sanitation system, right? So if there's less access to clean water, like Maggie's suggesting, so it's the investment in the water system will make people more susceptible to cholera. Okay. So this would be, yeah, okay. So the answers here are just a little off. So let me clarify here. These are things where there are cost-effective prevention or treatment, but so only countries that are very poor can afford to make the interventions. So with malaria, for instance, mosquito control programs will lower malaria because they're transmitted by mosquitoes, but that takes some national investment in water treatment and landscape management. Like I said, with cholera, modern sanitation systems like water and sewage systems will take care of cholera in general. So societies that can't afford that kind of infrastructure. So what associated with poverty means is that the means to prevent them is available, but it costs money, and that, to develop the systems to prevent them from happening. Wealthier societies are more likely to have diseases associated with longevity. These are things that people will get more when they're older. So if more people live longer, then these will be bigger issues. So heart disease is, except for last year, most years is the leading killer of Americans. So more people die of heart disease than any other cause in the United States most years. And that's because we have an older population compared to other places. And as people live longer, they're more likely to catch, not catch, you don't catch it. That's the thing. It's just something your body, that's a part of your body that fails, and it's important, and it's a cause of death. So associated with longevity means people who are older. Emergent epidemics is like what we're experiencing with COVID. So a new version or a new virus or a new bacteria. Those are all viruses that are listed there that emerged at different times in the 20th century. And then what responses is, responses refers to ways that, or just means that in all these things there's been responses, like we've already developed, or scientists have already developed a COVID vaccine. An influenza vaccine was developed. There's not a vaccine for HIV/AIDS, but there are effective treatments for it available. Okay. So these are all things, and it says advances and limitations. The idea of limitations is that because of limited resources in some places, or just because human beings are vulnerable to disease, that there are limits to what technology can do, even though we keep responding with more technology. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look here and see if you can identify the environmental issues that are happening, or which picture they go with. So I'm going to bring these things in here. Okay, so which one do you see where these match up with the different pictures? These are all environmental issues, and the College Board, I don't know, in a way to be kind of politically correct, in a neutral kind of way, calls these, that it causes debates about these things, but we can see that the real problems are here. Yeah, so we see deforestation is climate change, but it's also associated with overgrazing or plowing land up. So some deserts are getting larger, like the Sahara Desert is getting larger. Yeah, it is. Thank you, Emma. So what else do we see here? That's desertification, right? Drought. Okay. So these are all issues that, as the economy has expanded, and the population has expanded, the human impact on the environment has gotten larger. And then probably the most significant one of these that has come about in the 20th century is the issue of climate change. And the term to know is greenhouse gases. You might know that carbon dioxide, methane, water vapor are some of the main greenhouse gases associated with, human activity. So this is all related to the technology part of the key concepts, because it's related to the human interaction with the environment. So disease, the micro environment, if you will, and then here we might think of this like the climate as the macro environment, are all ways that people are interacting, yep, with their environment. All right. Let's go ahead and take a pause here and take a look at how people relate to each other. So this section is going to look at international organizations. And the most important such organization here is the United Nations. And this shows all these different images of what the United Nations is up to. So I mentioned the United Nations formed, or is one of the things that formed as World War II was ending. So it's post-World War II, but the organizational meetings for it began even before then. So why don't you just take a look here, and what do you notice in the images? What aspects of the UN can you see here? These images, it's just a way to kind of think about the different things that the United Nations does. So the United Nations replaced the League of Nations, which had, of course, failed to prevent World War II and did not have the United States as a member. So it was a new organization that grew out of the Allies in World War II. On the top left there is where that phrase comes from. It's not the United Nations, it's just by United Nations. And that's from during World War II. And we see some other things. Okay. That's right. Yeah, Lindley notices that there's conferring. That's from the first meeting up there in the top right, where people from different countries are meeting. I think we see El Salvador and the Dominican Republic. That's right. The United Nations is one of the big groups for promoting human rights. We see that. That's UNHCR, is the High Commissioner on Refugees, the idea that all humans have a right to be sheltered in some way. The picture in the lower right is an election in a place that hadn't had elections before. That's in Namibia in Southwest Africa, which was controlled by apartheid South Africa. Okay. So you have all these kinds of things happening. In the middle, this is the first UN peacekeeping mission. I think even before it was established, it's a specific thing, and that's in the desert in Egypt as part of ending a crisis around the Suez Canal, again, between Egypt, Israel, and Great Britain in 1956. All right, so now we're into the economics part. So here again, if you're writing some things down, and this is an area where you're like, I am not really sure about this part, because the economics comes up. So if we think about globalization, one of the things that it obviously means is, trade across the globe. And that's something that's happened for a long time, but has really increased, in the 75 years since World War II. So we see here kind of two different things. Again, in 1944, there was a conference, a meeting of economic officials from capitalist countries that were also connected to each other through the war effort, that was held at a place called Bretton Woods. And so you don't have to know that term at all, but it might come up or you might see it in your reading. And Bretton Woods was the name of a big resort. You can see there's a golf course there, and it's near the mountains, so I imagine you can get some skiing in. It's a hotel in the mountains in New Hampshire, old school lodge. And so there was a meeting held here in 1944. Okay, why am I telling you this? Because at this meeting, the representatives of these capitalist countries that were also in the Allies, that means like not the Soviet Union, because that's a communist country that was in the Allies, then also like not Germany, even though the fascists supported capitalism, they weren't invited. But so the Allies who were trying to promote capitalism came together, and their goal was to stop another Great Depression and another World War from happening, to try to prevent the problems that had led to World War II. And so they had several goals. And I've bolded the key terms that come up in the course and exam description here. So you're taking a look at those. What open markets means is trade between countries. So markets, so meaning a market is a place to buy and sell things. So when we say market or free market, open market, you can think about like a farmer's market as, or a place where you go and buy and sell things, a flea market, as kind of representing what's happening, but it means on a much bigger scale than that. So opening markets means, say, that Ford Auto Company in the United States could sell cars in Mexico, or that Mexican avocado farmers could sell avocados in the United States, in the US market. So that began with something called the General Agreement on Trades and Tariffs, and that led to the creation of an organization called the WTO. And that's definitely something that's worth writing down or knowing or highlighting in your notes. So the WTO, the World Trade Organization, is an international organization, and countries can be in it, and many hundreds of countries are. Well, there's not hundreds of countries, but more than 100 countries in the world are. And they agree to make it easier to trade with each other. So that's what open markets means. So that they'll be not blocking trade from other countries, not doing things to make it harder to sell things between countries. Then there was a currency part of this that has to do, that gets pretty complicated, and you don't need to know the details, but it has to do with how countries trade each other's currency. So if someone buys something from, again, buys a car from Ford Motor Company, and if the car's made in the United States, like it would have been then, they would pay for it in dollars. But if they're in Mexico and they have pesos, how do they change the pesos into the dollars? And that's a whole system. Yep. So the International Monetary Fund is an organization that makes sort of short-term loans to try to keep trade flowing. So if a country doesn't have enough of one particular currency and it needs more to kind of keep trade deals going, or there then the International Monetary Fund will make short-term loans. Okay. I don't think it's important for you to know the details of what each of these organizations does. Yeah, Nashika, that's the idea. The exchange, the currency exchange system. And and the details of it are probably quite complicated, but the idea of the International Monetary Fund, the M, the monetary, means that it was set up to try to keep trade going so that there wouldn't be currency shortages of particular kinds of currency. So it's kind of like a bank, in order to make sure that trade between countries could continue. Because part of what had happened in the Great Depression, countries got anxious about their own economies. And so they put up barriers that made taxes on other goods, or they did things to their currency, to the amount of money they were making, to make it more difficult for other countries to sell goods there in their own country. So, for example, the United States put up big taxes on imported goods coming to the United States, which kind of helped some American manufacturers, but it also made it harder for other countries to sell things here. And when everybody did that, the international trade went way down, and that made the depression worse. So this is all meant to try to keep that from happening again. And in some ways that's worked. Like there hasn't been a global economic crisis, the depression. But all these policies favor some people. It's very capitalist. So all the problems that capitalism has, these things contribute to. And all the good things that capitalism does, these things contribute to. Okay. The World Bank is focused on development. So it's a little bit different, meaning it's focused on countries that are lower income, lower production, that are trying to increase the amount of things that they're producing and the value of those products. And so it would give loans for like long-term development. Those are three important things. You can drop any questions you have about those, because then there's another burst of terms here that we can go ahead and take a look at. So what questions do people have about these? Just look at the top lines here. I'll go ahead and make a poll so I can get a better idea of where you're all at here. Okay. So with these, regional trade agreements are going to be things that are similar to what we just talked about, but only for regions. So NAFTA is for North America, EU is for Europe, and ASEAN is Southeast Asia. But ASEAN doesn't include China, but they often have a meeting where they include China. And then, or sometimes they include China and Japan. And then all of a sudden, ASEAN is like, plus those two is a huge chunk of the world economy. Okay. So the regional trade network trade agreements are different than the things we just talked about in two ways. One is they're regional, of course, they're not the whole world. They're just signed by countries from certain regions. But they're also um, more intense. So, like the EU, where a lot of countries are using the exact same money, that's a bigger deal. That's freer trade, more open markets than than anything that's happening through the WTO. All right. So these are all factors. These would all be things that are either causes or effects, or most likely both, from increased international trade? And I'm going to put a poll up and see if there's one of these that people most definitely want to learn more about. And you can check it out there in the bottom. Okay. And I know a lot of people, if you vote for a similar one to before, that's fine. So multinational corporations, going to the other corner there. Okay, you can go ahead and vote down at the bottom of the chat. Multinational corporations are corporations that have bases in multiple countries. They're not located in any one spot. I was using the Ford Motor Company, but of course, a lot of Fords are made in um, Mexico, and even if they're made in the United States, they have a lot of parts from other places. And a lot of Toyotas, which is a Japanese company, are made in the United States. There was one point, this is maybe 10 years ago, so it might not be true anymore, but where a Toyota Camry was the most American car you could make. Like it had the most American parts in it. Even though the company itself is from Japan, it was, they're manufactured in the United States. Okay. Knowledge economy are things that are related to, information technologies. And those are examples of places that are knowledge economies, where they're not making things. There's not manufacturing like in the traditional sense. In fact, a lot of manufacturing has moved to other areas. Okay, keep voting if you have some ideas about what you'd like to know. And then, as I mentioned before, and I'll say again, economic liberalization has to do with removing restrictions on what can be bought and sold, or who can buy and sell things. Okay, I think we can kind of see the results here. So this idea of a knowledge economy. Okay. I'll finish on economic liberalization, then I'll double back to knowledge economy for a little extra communication. So economic liberalization means it's a relative term. So that can include someone like Deng Xiaoping, who in China went from there being almost no free market, like everything being controlled through government planning, to making more possibilities for people to buy and sell things on their own, like produce and make. What free market would mean there in a country that had been completely communist would mean that farmers, for example, could sell some of their produce and keep the profits for themselves individually and not share them with the collective farm. It would mean that foreign companies could invest in China, like that was new, and at first it was controlled to a small area. For Reagan and Thatcher, in countries that were already capitalist, this meant less regulations for businesses on what they could do. In the case of Thatcher in Britain, it meant taking power away from unions so that businesses or the government could pay workers more what the businesses wanted to and less what the workers wanted. In Britain with Thatcher too, it also meant taking things that had been government-run businesses and then turning them over to private companies. So more private business in that way. So it's a relative term. So like before Reagan, the United States was much more economically liberal than China was after Deng, because the United States is not a communist system with huge state-run corporations and collective farms. So the idea of a knowledge economy then is that instead of thinking about production of goods or even production of services, if we think about it like throughout the study of world history, I was looking at things like fast ripening rice so that like more rice is produced, or the Industrial Revolution so that there's more production, and the means of production are producing more things. Well, we get to this idea of a knowledge economy, and it's things like designing better cell phones. The cell phones then are made somewhere else. If you think about this today, if people working for one of the big technology companies like Apple, the people who are designing the new iPhone, the phones are not going to be made there where the design is happening. The phones will be produced somewhere else. So a knowledge economy just means like research and development, working with information. Okay? And these are just terms that you can pepper into your essays, or that could be in the answer to a multiple choice question. So I just want you to be able to recognize these terms as you see them. Yes, the ideas for things. And what that means, Maddie, is that in order to develop the economy more, for knowledge-based economy here, that things like education and research and development are important. Things like internet access for everybody, or fast internet access, so people can get knowledge, um, and communicate knowledge better. Right. So a country like Finland has done well recently, not because they're making more things, but because they're developing products. Okay. This term, I think, is pretty straightforward once you break it down, and you can think of a lot of the examples on your own, because some of them will come from US history where you might have had classes before, even if it was in middle school. So, rights based discourse means that people are responding to oppression with language and strategies based around human rights. So, these are all categories that can be used to oppress people, or situations that can be oppressive. So these are all issues, these are all areas that people have addressed using rights based discourse. And all that means is where people have used the language of human rights or civil rights. You can think of the civil rights movement in the United States as an example, to address, to try to push for change, to make the, to improve situations. Okay. These are things to keep an eye out for, that people could be, what does oppression mean? Well, it could mean a lot of things, and categories to keep track of are political rights like voting. So if we could take a look then at the intersection of these things, at the beginning of the 20th century, there were no major countries where women could vote. So that's gender and political rights. But using rights based discourse and other strategies, and it's not just talking, but it's like using the pushing for those human rights, led over time to women gaining the right, earning the right to vote, seizing the right to vote in many different countries over time. So that's an example. Or you could look at racial discrimination in the United States and things like employment, and then the Civil Rights Act of 1964 addresses that. So kind of pushing for changes. Okay. And so then we're going to see different social movements. And there's so many possibilities here. I only listed 3 on the next slide. But you should just know that even if you talked about some in class, like anything that you know about where people worked for more rights using, based on people being denied rights on one of these ways as humans, that's an example. Okay, so here's a few examples that I think it's important to be aware of. There's one word that might be unfamiliar to you, and then 2 things that I think will be more familiar. Okay. So global feminism is a phrase. So I already talked about, women's right to vote. Global feminism refers to women around the world, or people around the world interested in women's rights, uniting and working together for for equal rights, regardless of gender. The one that you might not have been as familiar with is from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, and it's a French language movement called negritude, which literally kind of means blackness. It's a French word, and it was for equal rights as a Pan-African movement, and that was a literary movement. So that's one you might add, or it might come up. And then finally is the anti-apartheid movement of the kind of 70s and 80s, which was international in the 1970s and 1980s, and of course existed in South Africa itself into the the decades before that. So those are all examples of things we're talking about. So it could be literary, it could be based, like cultural, producing cultural equality. It could be based on global responses to gender oppression, or it could be focused on racial discrimination in a particular country. So like I said, there are a lot of different examples. Probably the most famous example of a rights-based discourse is the document that begins with this sentence. Okay, does anyone know what this is? What this is from? Should give you a chance before I show you which which document starts with this. It actually starts with whereas. There's whereases. The first word's actually whereas, and recognition is actually the second word. But I wrote it like a sentence like this. So anyone know where this comes from? Yeah, Emma, that is correct. This is from the UN Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. And again, you can think of this like the historical situation is this was immediately after World War II, when people had very much had human rights on their mind. Okay. Here's another example. This is from when India, the Republic of India, became independent in 1947, and there were elections and an assembly of people who wrote a constitution. So this is from the original Indian constitution for the Republic of India. Oh, you did. That's awesome, Jeremy. Did you do that in your class? Oh, for Model UN, right on. Yeah. Okay, so you can just take a look at this. And this is from the Indian Constitution. It says the state discriminate against any citizen grounds only of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, or any of them. Like any of those things. On grounds only of or any. So like any or all. Okay, and then it goes through different places where that can't happen. So if we were looking at this, I didn't do too much like DBQ and sourcing analysis here. Oops, sorry. Because there's a lot of the vocabulary here I wanted to be sure I could pause and lead into, and then the next CRAM will be looking specifically at some of those things. But my question is, if you were analyzing this as a document, how would we bring some of these things into effect? I think historical situation would be an important factor here. So how might the historical situation have affected this document? You think of, so this is in India. It's also in 1949, so that means immediately after World War II. And it also means that this is after India had been a colony. So you could think of any of those things about South Asian history, like in general, things about World War II, which had just ended, things about decolonization that might have led people to work against that they want to include these things in the Constitution. So just kind of consider that, how that might be. Right? Yeah, yeah, that's right. The countries were becoming then. Right? Yes. Okay, I see some good answers here. You can keep that coming. Now this slide here is more related to the economic part of globalization, and it shows ways that people have resisted this. So not everybody has accepted these movements. So a lot of this is direct, like the capitalism could be resistant to kind of enforcing capitalist policies in the countries that cooperate with them, that is going to take away rights from workers. So too much capitalism being bad for the environment or being bad for workers is one thing that a lot of people who are against globalization have in mind. There's also people who criticize it from more of a right-wing perspective, that it takes away independence from countries, that they're not able to do what they want. Okay. And now I just have a couple more things to show you, but it'll be quick as we go. So that these are economic parts. So it's also important to keep in mind that there's a cultural part to this. Here's Bob Marley. Do you kids know who Bob Marley is? So these things are all related, and it's the idea that culture is global, that people consume culture from all kinds of places. So that could be like reggae music being played around the world, like we have here. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. Um, it could be like music like that, or kids being into Japanese animation culture, or all over the world, or K-pop isn't in the course exam description, but I think it kind of belongs there. So yeah, look, at spelled K-pop right. That's nice. So these are all examples. World Cup soccer, the Olympics, people watch things on TV. It also